The text message appeared on my phone at 2:13 a.m. I'm sorry, Audrey. Everything you need is in the blue box under my bed. Please make sure my work matters. I called Eliza 17 times before driving to her apartment. Each ring echoed like a warning bell I couldn't silence. When I found her, the empty pill bottles were arranged in a perfect circle on her nightstand. Her body was still warm when I touched her wrist, searching desperately for a pulse that wasn't there. The paramedics pushed me aside. The police asked questions I barely heard. The coroner made notes on a clipboard while avoiding my eyes. Nobody needed to tell me what had happened. My brilliant, meticulous, gentle best friend had calculated her own exit down to the milligram. I sat on her living room floor until dawn broke, clutching the blue plastic storage container I'd found exactly where she said it would be. Inside were 6 identical black notebooks, a small hard drive, and a handwritten letter addressed to me. They wanted a cheater. I gave them a study instead. The university's psychology department held a small memorial service 3 days later. Eliza's parents were too devastated to attend. Most faculty members sent flowers rather than appearing in person. But they came, the 5 graduate students who had systematically dismantled her. They sat in the front row, their expressions carefully arranged into appropriate grief. She was so troubled, whispered Kane, the ringleader, loud enough for nearby professors to hear. I tried to reach out. We all did, added Fiona, dabbing at dry eyes. Some people just can't handle academic pressure. I sat silently in the back, the blue box hidden in my apartment, waiting. Eliza had taught me patience. She had given me the tools. I just needed to understand how to use them. If you're still reading, I hope you'll stay with me through this whole story. It's not an easy one to tell, but it's one that needs to be heard. If you find yourself connecting with what happened, please consider subscribing to this channel. Each story shared here helps another person feel less alone in their darkest moments. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened, and how my quiet, brilliant friend reached beyond death to deliver a justice no one saw coming. My name is Audrey Wells. Back then, I was halfway through my PhD in behavioral psychology at Gresham University. Eliza Clark had been my research partner, roommate, and best friend since undergraduate days. While I specialized in addiction pathways, Eliza's work focused on response patterns to academic hierarchy and competitive environments. At least, that's what everyone thought she was studying. The night after her memorial, I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor and opened the first notebook. Inside, in Eliza's precise handwriting, was a detailed research log spanning 2 years. The title page read, Induced Unethical Behavior in Academic Settings, a Case Study in Competitive Response Patterns. The subjects? Kane, Fiona, Gwen, Jude, and Leo, the 5 graduate students who had tormented her to death with cheating accusations. I read until sunrise, piecing together what no one else knew. 6 months earlier, Eliza had won the prestigious Wainwright Grant for her research proposal. The 5 had been finalists. 3 days after the announcement, the whispers began. First came questions about her test scores being statistically improbable, then suggestions that her research proposal was suspiciously sophisticated. Finally, direct accusations of plagiarism and data manipulation. Each attack meticulously cataloged in her notebooks, alongside behavioral analyses of her accusers. In life, Eliza had seemed fragile, petite, soft-spoken, prone to anxiety. But her notes revealed someone entirely different. A brilliant methodologist who had turned her own persecution into a groundbreaking study on how achievement triggers predictable, unethical behaviors in academic competitors. She hadn't been randomly targeted. She had anticipated the attacks and documented every instance as research data. The university's half-hearted investigation had found inconclusive evidence of academic dishonesty. But the damage was done. Professors became distant. Her lab access was restricted. Research partners dropped her. Every day brought new isolation. What haunted me most was realizing she'd never told me the full extent of their cruelty. Her notebooks detailed incidents I'd never known about, contaminated samples that destroyed weeks of work, accidentally deleted data files, anonymous messages suggesting she withdraw from the program. Each notebook contained daily records, behavioral analyses, and predictions of what her tormentors would do next. The final pages of the 6th notebook outlined what she called Phase 2, a methodology for creating controlled conditions where her accusers would exhibit exactly the unethical behaviors they had falsely attributed to her. The hard drive contained everything else: thousands of text message screenshots, email exchanges, recorded conversations in the lab, where they discussed ways to discredit her, and video from her hidden camera capturing them tampering with her experiments. 2 years of meticulous documentation, all leading to her final hypothesis. When placed under specific environmental conditions, individuals who weaponize academic integrity against others will invariably violate those principles themselves when they believe nobody is watching. Eliza had designed the perfect experiment. She just hadn't planned to live through it. 3 days after discovering the notebooks, I requested a meeting with Dr. Harlow, the department chair and executioner of Eliza's academic reputation. His office smelled of coffee and guilt as I slid into the chair across from him. "I'd like to continue Eliza's research," I said. As a tribute. Her methodology was groundbreaking. He shifted uncomfortably. "Audrey, I understand you're grieving, but there were concerns about her work. I've reviewed her notes extensively. Her experimental design was impeccable. I believe completing her study would honor her contribution to the field." Dr. Harlow studied me cautiously. What specifically would this entail? Creating the controlled environmental conditions she designed to test her final hypothesis. I'd need access to her grant funding and 5 research assistants, preferably the doctoral candidates who were most familiar with her work. 3 days later, I had approval. The 5 who had broken Eliza accepted my invitations immediately, eager to claim pieces of her research funding. None suspected they were merely continuing their roles as research subjects. "We're here to salvage what we can," Kane told the others during our first meeting, when he thought I couldn't hear. "This is damage control. Besides, the Wainwright money transfers to us now." I assigned them to the research stations Eliza had designated in her protocol, each position strategically designed to activate specific behavioral responses. Phase 2 had begun. Fiona was placed in charge of data collection. Gwen oversaw methodology compliance. Jude managed research assets. Leo handled participant interactions. Kane, naturally, positioned himself as project leader. Each role was perfectly tailored to exploit their particular weaknesses, just as Eliza had planned. "This is a sensitive project," I told them. "Given the circumstances, the department is watching closely. We'll be subject to random audits and oversight." The thread of observation was essential to Eliza's design. Her hypothesis predicted that, under perceived scrutiny, her tormentors would initially exhibit exaggerated ethical behavior, followed by increasing rule violations once they believed the scrutiny had relaxed. For 8 weeks, I followed her protocol exactly. Weekly research meetings, resource constraints, performance reviews, artificial deadlines, each element precisely calculated to create the conditions under which Eliza predicted they would break. Kane was the first. 6 weeks in, believing Dr. Harlow's oversight had waned, he began manipulating the preliminary data analysis to show stronger results. Exactly as Eliza had predicted on page 47 of Notebook 4, Subject A will alter statistical parameters when he believes external validation has decreased but pressure for results has increased. Fiona followed, falsifying participant response rates when her collection methods fell behind schedule. Gwen began cutting methodological corners. Jude misallocated research funds. Leo fabricated participant interactions. I never accused them, never confronted them. I simply observed and documented, creating the second data set Eliza's research required. Each unethical action they took validated her methodology with devastating precision. They grew confident in their cutting corners, certain I was too grief-stricken and naive to notice. In research meetings, they spoke over me, redirected the project toward their interests, and exchanged knowing glances when I referenced Eliza's original design. "Audrey, your loyalty is admirable," Kane said during our 10th week, "but perhaps we should consider more established approaches." Eliza's methodology had limitations she may not have recognized. I nodded meekly, playing the role of the overwhelmed, grieving friend out of her depth. "You all knew her work better than anyone. I trust your judgment." That afternoon, Kane removed 3 pages of critical methodological constraints from the research protocol. By evening, all 5 had logged into the system to view the altered document. None reported the changes. Their confidence grew with each ethical boundary they crossed. They believed they were erasing Eliza and claiming her work. In reality, they were completing her research with terrifying accuracy. 3 months after Eliza's death, Dr. Harlow scheduled the mid-project review required by the Wainwright Grant Guidelines. The 5 prepared their presentation, showcasing what they called significant improvements to Eliza's original design. The night before the review, I stayed late in the lab, preparing my own materials. As I worked, Leo returned, not expecting anyone to be there. He froze when he saw me. Working late? Just finishing up, I said, watching as his eyes darted to the open research database on my screen. Need any help? He asked, moving closer. No thanks, everything's ready for tomorrow. After he left, I checked the system logs. Within 20 minutes, all 5 had remotely accessed the research database, making frantic changes to cover their previous alterations. The next morning, I arrived at the conference room early, connecting my laptop to the projector as committee members filed in. The 5 entered together, their confidence palpable. Before we begin, I said once everyone was seated, I want to thank the committee for allowing me to continue Eliza's work. And I want to thank my colleagues for their participation in what has become the most important research project of my career. Dr. Harlow nodded encouragingly. We're all interested to see how you've developed her initial concepts. I pulled up the first slide. It wasn't the research summary they expected. Instead, it showed a simple title, Induced Unethical Behavior in Academic Settings, Completed Research Findings. Beneath it was Eliza's name as primary researcher, mine as research associate. Kane leaned forward. There seems to be some confusion. We've substantially revised the project's direction. There's no confusion, I interrupted, clicking to the next slide. I'd like to present the complete research as Eliza designed it, including Phase 1, which began 2 years ago, and Phase 2, which you've all helped complete over the past 3 months. The room went silent as understanding dawned on their faces. What exactly are you suggesting? Fiona asked, her voice tight. I looked directly at the 5 people who had driven my best friend to swallow 32 sleeping pills. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm presenting Eliza's completed research. You see, you were never her colleagues. You were always her study participants. The color drained from Kane's face. That's absurd. You can't possibly. I clicked to the next slide, which displayed Eliza's research timeline with 2 distinct phases. Phase 1, documentation of targeted academic harassment, and Phase 2, behavioral response testing under controlled conditions. For 2 years, I continued, Eliza tracked every incident of academic sabotage, every whispered accusation, every act of exclusion, not as a victim, but as a researcher studying behavioral patterns in competitive academic environments. Her hypothesis was that when achievement threatens perceived hierarchies, certain personalities resort to predictable forms of ethical violations. The committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dr. Harlow's jaw tightened. Phase 2 began 3 months ago, I said, advancing to a slide showing the organizational structure I had created. Each of you was assigned a role specifically designed to test behavioral responses under controlled conditions. I turned to the committee. The results are remarkable. When placed in positions of authority over another researcher's work, subjects exhibited precisely the behaviors they had previously falsely attributed to that researcher. Gwen stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We've been working to salvage a project after a tragedy. You're twisting. Page 47, Notebook 4. I interrupted, projecting Eliza's handwritten prediction onto the screen. Subject C will violate methodological protocols by week 7 when presented with impossible deadlines, then attempt to justify these violations as necessary improvements. Next to it, I displayed the system logs showing Gwen's methodological alterations from exactly 7 weeks after our project began, alongside her emails claiming these changes were essential refinements to flawed design. The room fell silent. I continued through each prediction Eliza had made, paired with the precise documentation of how each had come true. Altered data sets, falsified participation rates, misappropriated resources, every violation meticulously predicted and now proven. Leo laughed nervously. This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to strengthen weak methodology. I clicked to display his access logs from the night before, showing his frantic attempt to cover previous alterations after seeing me in the lab. The methodology wasn't weak, I said quietly. It was designed to expose exactly what it did. Dr. Harlow leaned forward. Audrey, what exactly are you presenting here? The completed research, as required by the Wainwright Grant Mid-Project Review. Eliza's study demonstrated that individuals who weaponize academic integrity against others will inevitably violate those same principles when they believe detection is unlikely. I advanced to the final slide, which displayed side-by-side comparisons of the accusations made against Eliza and the documented violations committed by her accusers. The research speaks for itself, I said. I'm simply delivering the results Eliza designed this study to produce. Kane slammed his hand on the table. This is a grief-driven vendetta, not research. Dr. Harlow, surely you don't consider this valid. Actually, interrupted Dr. Keller, the external committee member from the Ethics Board, I find the methodology quite sound. Miss Wells, you have comprehensive documentation supporting these findings? I nodded. Everything is included in the complete research package. Original notebooks, digital records, system logs, communication archives. The evidence spans 2 years and meets all verification standards. The 5 exchanged panicked glances as I distributed copies of the complete research findings to each committee member. The room temperature seemed to drop with each page they turned. This will require thorough review, Dr. Harlow said finally, his voice strained. Committee will reconvene after proper examination of these materials. As the meeting adjourned, Fiona grabbed my arm in the hallway, her fingernails digging into my skin. You manipulated us, she hissed. Set us up. I looked at her hand until she released me. No, Fiona. You did exactly what Eliza predicted you would do when placed in specific conditions. That's not manipulation. That's validated research. For the next 2 weeks, the university fell into uncomfortable silence. The 5 avoided me in hallways and canceled research meetings. I worked alone in the lab, finalizing Eliza's documentation while waiting for the inevitable. The committee's decision arrived on a Thursday morning. Dr. Harlow called me into his office, where Dr. Keller and 3 other committee members sat in solemn arrangement. We've reviewed the materials thoroughly, Dr. Harlow began, not quite meeting my eyes. The evidence is substantial and troubling, added Dr. Keller. Beyond the specific behavioral findings, this research raises serious concerns about academic conduct within the department. Dr. Harlow nodded. The committee has unanimously accepted the research validity. Eliza's methodology was sound. Her findings are supported by extensive documentation. I remained silent, waiting. There will be consequences for the ethical violations documented in Phase 2, he continued. But there are also questions about the ethical framework of the research itself. Eliza never deliberately created conditions for harassment, I said. She merely documented what was happening naturally in Phase 1, then created controlled conditions to test specific behavioral responses in Phase 2, using subjects who were unaware they were being studied, Dr. Keller noted. Subjects who had already demonstrated the behaviors being studied, I countered. The research simply provided opportunity for these behaviors to manifest under observation. The meeting continued for over an hour, oscillating between acknowledgement of the research validity and concerns about its unorthodox methods. Eventually, they reached their decision. The research would be recognized as Eliza's work, with appropriate ethical caveats noted. The 5 would face academic review for their documented violations. It wasn't justice. It was academia. As I left the building that afternoon, Kane was waiting by my car. His usual confidence had curdled into something bitter. Congratulations, he said. You've managed to memorialize your friend's breakdown as research. Is that what you wanted? I placed my bag in the passenger seat before answering. What I wanted was for her to be alive. We didn't kill her, he spat. She was unstable, couldn't handle legitimate questions about her work. I looked at him carefully, memorizing the self-righteous angle of his chin, the complete absence of remorse in his eyes. You know what's interesting about grief, Kane? It clarifies everything. Before Eliza died, I might have cared what happened to your career. Now I only care about what happens to her work. His expression darkened. This little stunt might have impressed the committee, but the academic community won't be so easily manipulated. Her research will be questioned, discredited. Nobody publishes methodology like this. I smiled for the first time in months. That's where you're wrong. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by Eliza's notebooks. The committee's recognition of her research wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was merely acknowledgement of what she had already proven. The 5 would face minor consequences, perhaps probation or temporary supervision of their work. Then academia would close ranks, protecting itself from the implications of what Eliza had documented. But that wasn't the end of her plan. The blue box had contained more than research notes. In the bottom section, beneath a false cardboard layer, I'd found a sealed envelope marked, "When Phase 2 is complete." Inside was a USB drive and a letter written in Eliza's precise handwriting. Audrey, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I couldn't bear it anymore, and you've completed Phase 2. I'm sorry for the first. I'm grateful for the second. What happens next is your choice. The attached drive contained something beyond my research. While documenting their attacks, I discovered something else they were hiding, something worse than what they did to me. The evidence is all there, verified and organized. Use it only if the academic system fails to deliver justice, which we both know it probably will. Remember what I always said about behavioral patterns? The truly revealing data isn't in what people do under observation, but what they do when they think no one is watching. You were the best friend I ever had. What you do with this is up to you. Eliza. That night, I connected the drive to my laptop and discovered exactly what Eliza had found while being systematically destroyed by 5 ambitious graduate students. It wasn't just about her, it never had been. When morning came, I made my decision. Eliza's research would speak for itself in academic circles, but her justice would come from somewhere else entirely. 3 days after the committee's decision, the 5 received their official reprimands: 6 months of supervised research activity, ethics training, and temporary removal from teaching assistantships. Minor consequences for destroying someone so completely she'd calculated her own exit down to the milligram. "A slap on the wrist," Leo complained loudly in the graduate lounge, not realizing I was in the adjacent kitchenette. "We'll have to keep our heads down for a semester, that's all." "Could have been worse," Fiona replied. "At least the research itself is compromised by its methods. No reputable journal will touch it." "Exactly," Kane agreed. 6 months from now, nobody will remember this. But people will remember that Eliza's work was ethically questionable. We still win. I stepped into the lounge, a mug of tea in my hand. Interesting perspective. They fell silent, exchanging glances. "You got what you wanted," Gwen said finally. "Her name on the research. Our reprimands. What more do you expect?" I sipped my tea calmly. "I don't expect anything. I'm just observing behavioral patterns like Eliza taught me." "It's over, Audrey," Kane said firmly. "The department wants to move past this." "Of course they do," I agreed. "Institutions always want to move past their failures. Good thing research isn't limited to institutional frameworks." I placed my mug in the sink and left them exchanging worried glances. They believed the consequences had been contained within academic boundaries. They had no idea what was coming. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Eliza's external drive connected to my laptop. On it were hundreds of files, meticulously organized in typical Eliza fashion. Beyond the research documentation, there was a separate folder labeled Pattern Extension. Inside was evidence of something far beyond academic sabotage. In the course of documenting their attacks against her, Eliza had discovered that the 5 had been engaged in something systematic. The prestigious Wainwright grant hadn't been their first target. For 3 years, they had operated as a coordinated unit, identifying promising researchers with breakthrough work, then systematically discrediting them and appropriating their research. Eliza had traced their pattern across 4 universities through social media connections, academic publications, and institutional movements. Each time, a promising researcher would produce exceptional work, face accusations of impropriety, withdraw or transfer under cloud of suspicion, and months later, slightly modified versions of their work would appear under new authorship. She had assembled everything: the original work, the timeline of attacks, the subsequent publications showing clear appropriation. Most damning were the private communications she'd managed to access, showing their deliberate strategy and target selection. It wasn't just academic bullying, it was systematic theft of intellectual property across institutional boundaries, and Eliza had documented all of it while they thought they were destroying just one vulnerable woman. The question wasn't whether to use this information, but how. As I studied the files late into the night, a plan began forming, not just for academic justice, but for the kind that would ensure they never recovered. Eliza had created the perfect research. Now I would create the perfect delivery system for her truth. 3 days later, I walked into the campus coffee shop where Dr. Yumi Tanaka, editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Behavioral Sciences, was visiting as part of a lecture series. I had requested this meeting through careful channels, ensuring the 5 knew nothing about it. "Dr. Tanaka," I said, extending my hand, "thank you for meeting me." She smiled warmly. "Your email was intriguing. You mentioned a unique research methodology with significant ethical implications?" "Yes," I said, placing a slim portfolio on the table. "Not just methodology, but findings that extend beyond a single institution." As she opened the portfolio, her expression shifted from professional curiosity to focused intensity. "This is extensive," she said finally, looking up at me with new interest. "And you have verification for all of this?" I nodded slowly. "Every element is independently verifiable. The institutional findings are just the beginning." She closed the portfolio, her decision already visible in her eyes. I think we should discuss this in more detail, perhaps somewhere more private. As we left the coffee shop, I caught sight of Kane watching from across the street, his face frozen in dawning comprehension of what was happening. He pulled out his phone urgently, but it was already too late. The wheels were in motion, exactly as Eliza would have designed them. The next morning, Audrey's phone buzzed with texts from all 5 of them within minutes of each other. We need to talk. Kane, what did you give Tanaka? Fiona. This has gone far enough. Gwen. Please call me as Leo. Let's discuss this like colleagues. Jude. I deleted each message without responding. Their panic was confirmation that Kane had recognized Dr. Tanaka and understood exactly what her interest in Eliza's research might mean. The 5 who had methodically destroyed my best friend were finally realizing that institutional reprimands might be the least of their problems. Dr. Tanaka didn't waste time. 3 days after our meeting, she assembled a review committee of international behavioral researchers to examine Eliza's complete findings. The evidence pointing to systematic theft of research across 4 universities warranted something beyond standard publication review. I received a voicemail from Kane that afternoon. This doesn't have to escalate. We acknowledge mistakes were made. Let's discuss reasonable resolution before careers are needlessly damaged. Careers, not lives. Even now, they couldn't see the difference. That evening, a knock at my apartment door revealed Gwen and Leo standing awkwardly in the hallway. 5 minutes, Gwen said. That's all we're asking. I let them in, curious about which approach they'd try. Leo paced nervously while Gwen sat perched on the edge of my sofa. What you're doing could have serious consequences, Gwen began. That's the idea. Not just for us, Leo interjected. Think about the department, the university. This kind of scandal affects everyone's research credibility. I studied them both. Interesting. When Eliza raised concerns about her work being sabotaged, neither of you worried about department credibility then. That was different, Gwen insisted. We had legitimate concerns about methodological anomalies. No, I corrected her quietly. You had legitimate fears that her work outshined yours. The methods were just your weapon of choice. Leo stepped forward. Look, we're not here to rehash the past. We're offering compromise. We'll publicly acknowledge contribution error regarding past research. In exchange, you restrict publication to the original behavioral study without the extended allegations. Contribution error, I repeated. That's what you're calling systematic theft of other researchers' work across multiple institutions? Gwen's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. Academic reputation is everything. Without it, you might swallow 32 sleeping pills. I finished for her. I understand consequences perfectly. They left 15 minutes later, having achieved nothing except confirming they still saw themselves as victims of circumstance rather than architects of destruction. The following week, an email arrived from Dr. Tanaka. After thorough review, the committee has unanimously voted to publish Dr. Clark's complete research, including the pattern extension documentation, in our next issue. Publication expected within 6 weeks. The verification process has been extensive but conclusive. I've also forwarded the relevant materials to ethics committees at all 4 universities identified in the pattern. They've expressed significant interest. Exceptional research deserves exceptional acknowledgement, however difficult the circumstances of its creation. Dr. Clark's methodology will change how we understand competitive academic environments. Dr. Y. Tanaka. I printed the email and placed it in Eliza's blue box alongside her notebooks. The academic acknowledgement mattered, but it wasn't justice. Not yet. 2 days later, Kane appeared outside my lab, his usual confident facade replaced by barely contained panic. Rochester University just contacted me, he said, his voice low and urgent. Their ethics committee wants to interview me about research from 3 years ago. What did you give them? Nothing they couldn't verify independently, I replied, continuing to arrange slides under my microscope. This is career suicide, not just for us, for you too. No one works with someone who destroys colleagues. I finally looked up. They weren't colleagues. They were predators. And Eliza wasn't your first victim. The color drained from his face. You can't prove that. I don't need to. Eliza already did. The beauty of her research is that she created a perfect map of behavioral patterns. Once you know the pattern exists, you can trace it backward and forward. 4 universities, 7 researchers, 1 consistent method of academic theft. He gripped the edge of the lab table. We can make this right. Tell me what you want. I want Eliza alive, I said. Can you arrange that? His silence was answer enough. He left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. Over the next 3 weeks, the carefully constructed world of the five began unraveling with astonishing speed. Rochester University reopened an investigation into research misconduct from 3 years earlier. Vanderton College contacted Fiona and Leo about questionable authorship claims. Stanford requested interviews with all five regarding a graduate student who had left their program after similar accusations. They stopped coming to campus. Emails went unanswered. Their social media accounts either disappeared or fell silent. The whispers that had once followed Eliza now trailed them instead. Dr. Harlow called me into his office, his expression grim. The department is receiving inquiries from multiple institutions regarding research integrity concerns. Yes, I said simply. That tends to happen when patterns become visible. He sighed heavily. This goes far beyond our internal review. It always did. You just didn't look closely enough. Audrey, I understand your loyalty to Eliza, but the scope of these allegations. Did you consider the institutional implications? I studied him carefully. Did you consider the human implications when Eliza came to you about the harassment? He had no answer for that. That weekend, as I organized Eliza's materials for archival preservation, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Is this Audrey Wells? Asked a woman's voice. Yes. My name is Meredith Zhao. I was a graduate student at Rochester 3 years ago. I just read about Eliza Clark's research. My hand tightened around the phone. How can I help you? They did the same thing to me, she said, her voice quivering slightly. The same 5 people. The same pattern. I left the program after they accused me of data falsification. I've never spoken about it publicly. Would you be willing to speak about it now? There was a moment of silence before she answered. Yes, I'm not the only one either. I've been in contact with others who experienced the same thing. By the end of the call, I had names of 5 more former graduate students across 3 universities who had encountered the same group, the same tactics, and the same outcome. Their work discredited, their reputations damaged, and versions of their research later appearing under new authorship. Eliza hadn't just documented her own destruction. She had uncovered an academic criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Keller from the ethics board stood outside my apartment, holding a thick folder. May I come in? I think we should talk. Once seated at my kitchen table, he opened the folder. After reviewing Dr. Clark's complete research, I conducted my own investigation. What I found was disturbing. He spread out papers showing grant histories, publication timelines, and institutional movements of the 5 over a 7-year period. This goes beyond research misconduct, he said gravely. There's evidence of grant fraud, intellectual property theft, and coordinated harassment across multiple institutions. The pattern is unmistakable once you know what to look for. Eliza saw it, I said quietly. Yes, she did, and now others are seeing it too. He tapped the folder thoughtfully. The Office of Research Integrity at the National Institutes of Health has opened a formal investigation. This has moved beyond academic concerns into potential criminal activity. After Dr. Keller left, I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by Eliza's meticulous documentation of her own destruction. The wheel was turning now, gaining momentum beyond anything I could control, or that the 5 could stop. That evening, Fiona called. Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. It's over, she said. Rochester just rescinded my doctorate pending review. Stanford has frozen Kane's grants. Leo's fellowship has been suspended. We're finished. You finished Eliza first, I reminded her. We didn't know she would. She couldn't complete the sentence. Yes, you did. You just didn't care. There was a long silence before she spoke again. What happens now? What always happens in research? The truth emerges. Patterns become visible. Conclusions are drawn. After she hung up, I opened my laptop and began writing the email I had been composing in my mind since finding Eliza's body. It was addressed to 37 behavioral psychology department chairs across the country, the editors of 14 academic journals, and the grant committees of 9 major research foundations. The subject line reads simply, Eliza Clark's final publication. Attached was a complete digital archive of everything. Eliza's original research, the extended pattern documentation, statements from previous victims, grant histories showing systematic fraud, and publication timelines demonstrating theft across institutional boundaries. In the body of the email, I wrote only this. Attached is the complete work of Dr. Eliza Clark, whose life ended at age 29 after systematic academic harassment. Her research demonstrates that academic misconduct follows predictable patterns when properly documented. The evidence spans 7 years, 5 institutions, and 12 victims. Dr. Clark's methodology transformed her personal tragedy into groundbreaking behavioral science. Her work deserves recognition not despite the circumstances of its creation, but because of them. The data speaks for itself. The pattern is now visible. The research is complete. I pressed send, then closed my laptop. 3 days later, the first news article appeared online: Major Academic Fraud Ring Exposed Through Posthumous Research. By evening, the story had been picked up by national outlets. By the following morning, the presidents of 4 universities had announced formal investigations. I watched from a distance as the world Eliza had mapped so precisely collapsed around the 5 who had driven her to calculate her own exit. Their academic careers evaporated. Their publications were flagged for review. Their names became synonymous with the largest academic fraud scandal in recent history. 1 month after Dr. Tanaka published Eliza's complete research in the International Journal of Behavioral Sciences, I received a letter from the Wainwright Foundation. They were establishing the Eliza Clark Award for Research Ethics and Methodology Innovation. The first recipient would be announced the following spring. I placed the letter in the blue box alongside her notebooks and hard drive. Then I did something I hadn't done since finding her body. I cried. Not the desperate, helpless tears of that first morning, but quiet tears of completion. Eliza's work was finished. Her research was recognized. Her tormentors were exposed not just as bullies, but as frauds. It wasn't justice, exactly. Justice would have been Eliza alive to see it happen, but it was truth, and in academic research, truth is the closest thing to resurrection we can offer. 6 months later, I stood at Eliza's grave, placing fresh flowers against her headstone. The morning newspaper lay beside them, open to the headline, "Former graduate students face federal charges in academic fraud case." "Your research was perfect," I told her. "The methodology worked exactly as you designed it. The justice wasn't that they lost their careers or faced charges. The justice was that Eliza's name would be permanently attached to the research methodology that exposed them and would protect future researchers from similar predators. Her work would outlive her death and their destruction." In her final notebook entry, 3 days before taking her life, Eliza had written, "The most important finding in behavioral research isn't what people do when they think everyone is watching. It's what becomes visible when they believe no one is." She had made them visible. I had simply ensured everyone was watching. If you're still with me after this story, I want to thank you for listening. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do when someone we love is taken from us is to make sure their truth outlives the lies that broke them. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more stories of justice found in unexpected places. For those who've ever lost someone to a system that should have protected them, remember, their truth doesn't die with them if we're brave enough to carry it forward.